Hey everybody, it's Monster back again with Opus Gaming, and I'm here today to present to you guys our first place Eustass Captain Kid deck profile for the One Piece OP01 format. We had a deck profile for this in the limited deck battles, so this is just gonna be a follow-up to that, but I piloted this to a first place finish at my locals, and I'm really excited to bring this to you guys, especially because it's our first place green deck profile, so you guys know how important that is to me if you guys have been following the channel for a little while. But right before we get into that, 98% of you guys that view my content aren't subscribed to the channel. So if you guys want to subscribe down below, I'd really appreciate it. Drop a comment if you guys have any comments about anything that you see in the deck profile, and like if you guys like and have been enjoying this One Piece content. But let's get straight into the Eustass Captain Kid deck. The first thing that you got to note about a Captain Kid deck is he is going to be your end game kind of like goal. The biggest thing that you can do with him is attach 7 Dawn to him, leave 3 up, and swing 12 at your opponent, right? Tap 3 and discard 1 card, and swing 12 at your opponent again. That's really the reason that you play this deck, because you have that as a really strong finisher. It's really hard for your opponent to get out of that, at least consistently. So that's kind of where the deck wants to go. So that's what the leader does. We're going to start off with some of the 1-drops here. But starting off, this deck kind of splits off into 2 big parts of the engine. It's going to be the Supernova stuff, and then it's also going to be the Wano package. So talking about the Supernova stuff here, we have 4 of Jewelry Bonnie. Her effect is pretty well known, but it's tap 1. She looks at top 5 and grabs you a Supernova. That is just really important, because in this deck, essentially all you want to do is accrue resources from your deck and just be drawing as much as possible. So when you're going into the late game, you can go into the late game with a really big hand, so you can defend your important pieces just really easily. You follow that up with a 1-drop Capone Beige. He is literally just a blocker. He's a really easy blocker to field. So a lot of times what you want to do is I play 4 of them because you want to see him throughout the game. You do want to see him early in the game to protect your early Jewelry Bonnie plays, but you also want to see him late in the game to protect yourself with an easy blocker once your opponent has expended a lot of their resources, right? So that's really the reason that we're playing these 1-drops. But I mean, Bonnie's really well known, and she's just a fantastic card kind of all together. So 4 of each of those. Going into our 2-drops, just kind of going one by one here. Actually, we have one more 2-drop. We have the Killer here. So these are both defensive 2-drops, actually. So with the we'll start off with the Killer. This is a 2-drop blocker, and the reason we're playing 3 of this and 4 of the Capone, even though Killer has counter power, is because Killer's effect is kind of just a bait. I feel like a lot of times when I attach a Dawn onto him, unless it's really, really late into the game, my opponent just really doesn't have any other options. I'm not getting the draw 1 off of him because my opponent's going to find a way to get around it, or I'm not going to have enough cards on the board. So he's really just a 2-drop blocker, but a lot of times I end up countering with him out of hand. And I just felt like seeing Capone was just a little bit more important. But I think that that's kind of a personal choice. If you wanted to swap this one over to 4 just to have more counter in your deck in total and play 3 Capone, you could definitely get away with that, because this card only costs 1 more on investment. And just his effect is if he has a Dawn under him, when he blocks, you draw a card if you have 3 or more characters, which is actually a very strong effect. This is Scratchman Poe. I've never played him, even when I was playing a version of this deck that played Straw Sword. He is really just there for the 2K counter, and he's searchable. Those are the only 2 things that matter for him. You really want to stockpile those up in your hand so you can just dump them when you get later to the game. Next 3-drop that we have here is just going to be Killer. For the Killer, he's in here for a couple reasons. He synergizes well with all of your free play cards that let you play 3-drops for free. And I really wanted to utilize that as opposed to just playing blockers over and over again. I wanted to play cards that have an impact on my opponent's board. Unfortunately, with Killer specifically, he's really only solid against red and green. He doesn't have too much that he can do efficiently against blue, and can't do too much efficiently against purple, but he is kind of useful. So I do like him a lot at 2. It's a utility slot. He does have counter, and he does have trigger. So if he does play out a life at a crucial point, you can stack Dawn on him and attack with him. And we can kind of double back to the Killer as well with some of the combos, but the first card that combos with him is going to be the 5-drop Trafalgar Law. This card is very important in my opinion. He is the combo maker. He can do a lot of things for you. There's honestly just such a long list of ways you can utilize this. What he does is he is a 5-drop blocker with 6,000 power that bounces one of your characters back to your hand to play a 3-drop or less. So he can really just help push the pressure. Essentially, you can swing out with your board, and your board by tapping 5, playing him, pick up one of your important pieces, like maybe a Bonnie that you tapped early to start picking up resources early. play down an extra blocker like a Capone. One thing I really like doing with this, and this is just like a small tip, is I like not playing cards that do have counter in my hand when I have the option of playing cards that don't have counter. So if I have the option to pick up a Bonnie and, you know, play the Bonnie down and pick up another card, I will only do that if picking up that other card is super important. But for the most part, I'll try to play something like a Capone, because the Capone is dead in your hand. But when it comes down to it, if your opponent's swinging a very high number at a very important card, you might have to ditch a Bonnie and find other ways to draw. But thankfully in this deck, there are a lot of other ways to draw. But Law just makes a lot of plays happen, and he's a bigger blocker. Not that it matters, because really what blockers are going to be doing is sacrificing themselves to protect your bigger cards. But with this one, it's going to be nice dropping him in the mid game and just mitigating some of the excessive damage that some decks can put onto you. So Law is very good. But let's move on to getting into our Wano package. As opposed to the Supernova package, with the Wano package, we only have one drop, and that's Momonosuke. He does the same thing as Jewelry Bonnie, except for he has 1,000 less power, and he is not searchable. Or I'm sorry, it's not that he's not searchable, but he only searches Wano cards is what I was trying to say. So that's he's really a staple. And there's another card that these cards go very well with. I know some people have been dropping down how many of the 1-drop Momonosuke's and things like that they're playing, but I would highly suggest playing 4 of those, and we'll talk about that in a second here. But for 2-drops, for the Wano package, the biggest thing that you want to be doing is resting down your opponent's characters so you can swing into them, and deprive your opponent of resources. You really want to go into your opponent's life really hard, and when they can't defend it properly. And a lot of that is going to be clearing some of their threats in the early game, the mid game. Neko Momushi does that fantastically, and so do a lot of the other cards that are coming right after. But the biggest thing with him, the reason he's on 4 because you want to consistently see it to out your opponent's things like your opponent's cards that they drop on curve on 3. There's a lot of them out there that are useful, mainly Okiku and Nico, because they will tear your board up. But outside of those two characters, you really do just want to use this to keep momentum on your opponent. And having 4 of them, you can drop them with tempo. Drop them early in the game to get your opponent's early cards off the board. Drop them late in the game to get around your opponent's blockers. That's really the biggest strategy with Neko. Going into the next card, we have Okiku. Okiku, first of all, is at a 2-of. This card is fantastic, but I'm going to start off with it being at a 2-of because it has no counter power, and that's just really important to me. I do love dropping this card on curve on 3, just because it's really safe to drop Trafalgar Law and your other 5-drop on 7, and then going into your Dawn 9 to drop your big 8-drop Kid. So there is actually a lot of use for Okiku in this deck, because you can really abuse that Dawn that you have, the extra Dawn that you have, before you have to go into your medium-sized cards. But she doesn't have counter. Her ability is to rest down 5 cost and less characters, which is really fantastic. If you swing 7 into your opponent's leader, right, to try to push them down to like 4 or 3 or something like that, while resting down another character, and then you start piling into that character, making your opponent ditch cards, and then just really pushing like that for the next turn, it's really effective. So it's a good way to establish board presence, and then if your opponent really wants to commit cards to it, you can honestly just let her go, let your opponent go into your life, and now you're picking up life, getting resources while swinging into your opponent's characters, like we talked about earlier, and depriving them of resources. So speaking of resources, I'm on 4 Raizo. 4 Raizo is one of my favorite cards in the deck. It's a 3-drop whose effect is when you have another rested character, when he attacks, you draw a card. So he pairs really well on curve with your Jewelry Bonnie and your Momonosuke. I like to drop him on 3, and then going into turn 5, tapping 2 to play out the Jewelry Bonnie or the Momo, getting that extra card to my hand, and then attacking with him, because now I'm drawing 2 cards plus the card I got for turn, which is really, and doing that on 5, when you're going into 7, if you can do it 2 times in a row, if you can do it that turn, put out a blocker or something to finish your turn out, right? Protect one of your characters and have something that you can for sure get another card on your next turn. Going into your turn 9, you're gonna have a huge hand and have a really powerful board to drop your 9-drop Kid. I love Raizo. He's one of my favorite cards in the deck. He has counter power, so you can counter him off when you have excessive ones of him. But he's kind of like a destruction magnet, I guess is what I'm trying to say. If you put him on the board and your opponent recognizes how important he is, they will jet pistol him and do whatever else they have to try to out him. And it's kind of up to you to kind of drop him at a time that you think is most opportune. But if you can abuse a Raizo and utilize his effect, I would say like 2 times or 3 times in a game. Usually that's just too many cards that you're above on your opponent for them to get out of. So I love this card like a lot. So getting into the Ezo, we'll make this quick. It's a fantastic card. It's way better than the 2-drop for the Supernova package, but it does the same thing as Nekomushi and Okiku, where it rests down your opponent's cards to get them out of resources. But this one is cards that it rests are 4 costs and less. So with it being 4 costs and less, there's a good amount of cards that she can come in that your Nekomushi just can't rest. But you really want to play her as little as possible because her counter power is 2k, and you just want to stack those 2k power counters up in your hand for the late game. So you'll only utilize this when it's a really good time, but it's nice that she's a dual purpose card and she does come up, where having her has definitely won me a handful of games. Going into the last Wano card, which is going to be Yamato. This card is fantastic, but it's really about dropping her at the opportune times. If you're going to drop her on curve at 5, just really do your best to read the board state, read what cards have sunk into your opponent's life, how many times have you swung into your opponent's life, how many blockers have you cleared and things like that. I think that her opportune times to come out are post 8-drop Kid. You want to protect her, you want to put her on the board and just start sucking resources out of your opponent so that the game can't go too much longer without really giving them anything. And playing her at 2 is really good because she has counter power and she's searchable. But my one big tip with Yamato is I like to drop her. My rule for her versus purple is drop her after they've dropped a Kid. Or not the Kid, I'm sorry, once they've dropped the Kaido. If you drop her post Kaido, they just have a lot less that they can do, and a lot of times it's just going to be dropping a queen, and you're just going to pile Dawn onto her, swing, they're going to block with the queen, and there's only so many queens in their deck, you know? So one of the times that's going to sink. And then the rest of your attacks are just going to be attacking into whatever swung into your Kid, or if you really think you can push your opponent down because purple doesn't have counter power, you can push on those kinds of plays. But that's just my little tip against playing against purple. Now let's talk about the card that is not in any archetype, the Shashi. What this card is a card that is different than Killer and Capone because it gets around Nico, Robin, and Shanks. Those are the only 2 cards in the meta I can really think of right now that are really important for this card to be getting around, which doesn't feel like a lot, but when you're playing cards that have 3 costs specifically, I would never tap 3 for this card, but I would play it for free with my effects almost every time. Because when Shashi comes down, he's a decent sized blocker, right? Where if your opponent is swinging 5k at something small like a Jewelry Bonnie, it's actually pretty decent to block with him. 2k counter out, right? And then use him as a card that you can push onto your opponent because it only takes 1 Dawn to attach onto him to make him a attacker. So he's a dual purpose card just because of his stat line. He's counter outable. And I just like the variety. Having a card in your deck that is actually an out to that red matchup, to how they get around to your smaller blockers, is actually it's just really nice to have. So having a toolbox in these control style decks, I think is very important. And that's really the reason that Shachi's in there. I wouldn't actually switch him out or put him in for another killer personally after playing the deck. And finishing out the deck profile, we're just going to go into the biggest part of the deck, which is going to be the 8-drop Kid. 8-drop Kid, a lot of people knows what he does, but when he has 1 Dawn on him, your opponent can only attack into him, so it's basically your leader's AK now, and you want to go into the end game with a huge hand, right? And a lot of different ways to protect him. You're going to bring out a lot of blockers and things like that, but let's be honest, blockers are one of the easiest things to get around when you plan around it, and that's a lot of what your opponent's going to plan around doing for the green matchup. So a lot of what we're going to be doing is countering out, just dumping our hand the turn that he comes out if your opponent is committing a lot to a swing that can get around blockers. And then on the next turn, when we're on 10 Dawn, we're leaving Dawn up to use Repel. So talking about Repel right now, this versus Punk Gibson and versus Paradise Waterfall, the reason you play Repel is because it's the most defensive out of the 3. What Punk Gibson can do is it has a really strong security or trigger effect, sorry. And it can also rest down. Really what it does is rest down your opponent's blocker so you can swing into your opponent's life a little bit easier. I do try to just play my deck a little bit more aggressive with the cards that I have in the mid game to get myself into a perfect position to finish out the game with my Captain Kid and things like that. So I don't really feel like I need Punk Gibson to set myself up to rest blockers and things. But the biggest benefit with Repel, with why it's more defensive, is just because once you stack them in hand, you want to search out multiple of them, and you want to use this as your big blocker on the turn after you've dumped your whole hand, just because you can go up to insane numbers with multiple of these. And the reason you play multiple of them is because the first one costs 2, but everyone after that only costs 1. You tap, so if you have 3 of them in hand, you would leave 4 non up, tap 2, restand 1 and be on 3, tap 2, restand 1, be on 2, and you can resolve all 3 of them from hand, and I think that that is just really powerful. If you can get out of 3 attacks that your opponent's swinging 10k at your kid trying to suck your hand down, right, 2 cards at a time, and every card is 1 card, you can live for an entire another turn, and then you just can accrue resources, put cards on the board, and it's just really free to get out of damage. And if in a pinch, it's just a really easy way to protect your leader as well. I really like the Repel. They stack up really well. It's a really good defensive sequencing kind of thing. But I can see the power in things like Punk Gibson with having a trigger effect and everything. But working with Repels has been really fantastic for me. I've gotten up to, I think my highest has been 20k on top of that kid. And then like one time 17k when he got Otama'd. So it's definitely got some really good uses. But this is going to be the deck profile. There's not a lot that I would change, honestly. I mean, it's just really minor things at this point. But I'm really, really digging this version of Captain Kid. But this is going to be Jamonster with Opus Gaming. If you guys have made it this far and you're not subscribed to the channel, I would really appreciate it. We're on the road to our first 1,000, but we're going to be breaking it up. We're really looking at trying to hit our first 250. I'm going to have something special for that, and then kind of pushing forward from there. So this is going to be Jamonster with Opus Gaming. I'm out. Take care, guys.